Mr. President, the other thing I'd like to talk about would be what happened beginning on Sunday in the country as people tried to travel when approximately 47,000 Federal Aviation employees were furloughed, and furloughed in a way that created needless airport delays nationwide. The announcement came on the heels of a report that the President has cut other public services like the self-guided tour at the White House. I can't imagine how much the self-guided tour at the White House cost, but I do know that it was cut when almost every school student in America that comes to Washington was coming to Washington, and one of the things that they would have liked to have seen would have been the White House, so I guess there's some immediate pain involved there, just like there's been pain involved at airports since Sunday. The airline industry wasn't even told until late last week that this was going to happen. This has been a really mismanagement and intentional mismanagement. As late as September the 28th, the Office of Administration and Budget sent out a notice to the entire executive branch of the government that said, spend your money. This is for the fiscal year, the spending year that begins October 1. Spend your money like the law will not be obeyed. And suddenly, 6 months into the spending year, the spending caps, the budget caps, the amount of money that had been appropriated beyond that, it's twice as big a problem as it would have been October 1. And then you've got to give notice to people that they're going to be furloughed if that's the option you've taken, and it's a bigger problem than it needed to be. During his sworn testimony before the Congress last week, FAA Administrator Michael Huerta admitted that the agency has the flexibility under current law to transfer up to 2% of funding from one activity to another, and also, as President, they could ask to transfer up to 5%. 5%, setting priorities, asking the Congress, 2% without even asking the Congress. 5% by asking the Congress could be transferred. There was a serious discussion and an amendment offered early this year in the continuing resolution debate to give the agencies the authority they needed to set priorities between now and September the 30th, but the administration clearly said it didn't want to be able to set those priorities. The idea that any reduction in federal spending has to create the maximum amount of pain is offensive to me. I think it's offensive to most Americans. The FAA currently spends $2.7 billion annually on non-personnel costs. The day that they laid off, they started this saving $600 million by furloughing employees, they announced $474 million of new grants for sustainable and livable communities. Now, I'm actually for sustainable and livable communities, but this was a new program. It was a program that I would bet a considerable amount of money that if the Department of Transportation would have come to the Congress and said, could we spend this $474 million on keeping the airlines and the airports working, the freight that goes all over the country, the people that go all over the country to do business and create jobs, I'll bet you the Congress would have said, absolutely. Take that $474 million, don't announce those new grants that you haven't told anybody they have yet, and use it to solve this problem while we work to see if there are better ways to solve this problem. Last week I introduced the Essential Services Act as a standalone bill. I introduced that same act. In fact, during the continuing resolution, we were able to get a part of it into the continuing resolution for food safety inspectors. But what the Essential Services Act says is that people who are essential to public health and safety have to show up for work. The basis for that is President Clinton in 1995 on August the 22nd issued a letter, which I'm going to put in the record, I would think without objection, Mr. President.
No objection.
And that letter from Alice Rivlin, the director of OMB, says here are the people that have to show up for work if the government shuts down. The government did shut down, we all remember, in 1995, and these people did show up for work. On April the 6th, 2011, it appeared that we were about to have another government shutdown, and the Obama administration put out a similar letter based on the same groups of people. These are not hard people to identify, as it turns out. And on the 6th of April, 2011, the examples they gave of essential employees who would have to work would be FAA employees, air traffic that would keep the air traffic control system open. FEMA disaster operations would continue. Social Security checks would be sent out to beneficiaries. The Weather Service alerts and forecast would be maintained. The U.S. Postal Service would continue to collect mail and deliver mail. The Customs and Border Protection activity would continue. The food safety inspectors would show up. There's a list, Mr. President. I also put this notice from the Obama administration in the record without objection.
Without objection.
And this is not very complicated. All the Essential Services Act says is that if the people that the government said had to show up if there's no money to run the government would also be the people that would be prioritized and would be allowed to show up if there's a 2.5% cut. Now, who can argue with that? The people that are told the weather is really bad today, if you think that you have some risk of your person to get to work, don't come in. But these people are told if you could possibly get to work, get to work. Because the food safety inspector, if the food safety inspector doesn't get there, 500,000 Americans couldn't work that day if they didn't show up at every food safety facility where that one federal employee has to be there for anybody to work. If the air traffic controller doesn't get there and the runways are cleared off and planes can land and planes can take off, that may not happen if the air traffic controller isn't there. This says those people would be not subject to furlough under the new Budget Control Act. They would have the same priority on a day when there's a reduction in the funding for a department that they had in the day when there was no funding for the department. Now, Mr. President, if people are told they have to show up when there's no money to run the government, surely those same people need to show up if there's a 2.5% reduction. The definitions set by President Clinton and President Obama and their administrations are fine with me for this purpose. Washington is living outside its means today. Federal spending has skyrocketed 19% since 2008. The federal debt now is approaching $17 trillion. Clearly, we have to do something about spending, and we can do that without interrupting people's lives. We can do that by prioritizing what the government should do. Then we had before the Commerce Committee last week that Senator Rockefeller chairs and Senator Thune is the ranking Republican. We had Mr. Huerta in there, I think it was Wednesday. There was no discussion that Sunday we're going to start furloughs of air traffic controllers. The legitimate oversight responsibility, Mr. President, for our committee to be told by the FAA director, our plans are our plans are drawn up. We're about to execute them. I'm here to testify before the Congress. I think one of the things I should tell you is that all kinds of flights are going to be delayed on Sunday and Monday because of this plan. Not mentioned. Plenty of questions, even questions about how you were going to furlough employees, but no answers. So, Mr. President, I encourage Americans to visit our website, bit.ly.com/cut wasteful spending. Let's find the things that we can cut rather than finding things that if you cut them, and from the White House tours to vaccines for kids, to air traffic controllers, to border security guards, I hope that we'll do the right thing, and I'd encourage Senator Reid to allow a vote on the Essential Services Act and prioritize the way we spend money